Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer on the World Puja Network. Dr. Greer's out of town this week, so this is Linda Willitts and Dr. Ted Loder. We've both been close colleagues of Dr. Greer's for the past 12 years. Dr. Loder has been his science advisor, and I've been his assistant. And today, Dr. Loder will give an energy device update, and then we'll both discuss our involvement with CSETI, which is Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the Orion Project, and how our work with Dr. Greer has helped us develop our capacity to see beyond the veil and detect the more subtle ways ETs and their craft appear. So here's Dr. Ted Loder first with a brief energy device update.
Thank you, Linda. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon on the World Puja Network. We've had in the past several hour discussions or interviews with Dr. Greer talking about the energy project of the Orion Project.org. www.orionproject.org, and where the Orion Project is helping support and searching for a number of various, what we would term breakthrough technologies or technologies outside the box that may change our energy paradigm or energy production paradigm. The goal of the Orion Project is to find a technology that can ultimately be used by a householder or in a household to produce enough energy to run a house off the grid and non-polluting, a standalone device not plugged into the wall, not using fossil fuels, etc. We're working or supporting or working with some inventors, looking at several different types of technologies. And we've discussed these on the OrionProject.org over the last 6 months to a year. And I'll quickly just go through where things are in several of these technologies. Everything's a bit quiet now. In fact, Linda and I were laughing in the pre-interview stage here about all the inventors are quietly working in their basements and garages on technologies, and not much seems to be happening between the Christmas and the New Year's holidays. But let me go through a couple of these. We've been working with a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer for the last 6 months. So we've shown some of his devices on our website, and we just had another fellow working with us visit this gentleman, Mr. Q. And so he has some suggestions for working with the three of us, and we're sort of continuing that progress that Mr. Q had a while ago, had an accident, automobile or motorcycle accident, and had to spend some time getting his hands repaired and what have you, and that's going on very well, so glad to tell you that. So that was delayed for a while, but we're hopefully getting back on track on that within a few weeks. One of the other technologies that we're working on and is the Stan Meyer technology, the hydroxy production using various electrolysis type of technologies to produce what's known sometimes as Brown's gas or hydroxy gas, a mixture of hydrogen and oxygen that then can be burned to produce heat or run an engine or what have you, run a generator. We have been in negotiation with the folks that own a lot of Stan Meyer's technology or his devices, including his water fuel car that has been on YouTube and on various TV programs or what have you. And we are in the final stages of negotiation with that technology. And hopefully that will come to fruition, final negotiations sometime within this month, January 2009. So that's where that is. Our plan there is to, just so people know, I've had a lot of people contact me about, well, why don't you just get all the information and post it on the internet so everybody can see what's there? Well, it's not going to exactly work that way. It's going to take a fair bit of time to assess the lab books, the notes, and the documents, the photographs that are in this cache of materials, as well as the circuit boards and the other types of things that were Stan Meyer's technology. It's going to take us a period of time to assess what we have, to make copies, scan the documents and what have you, and then start to put that together. And then put together, our plan then is to put together a team. It's going to take several $100,000 actually, at a minimum, to put together a team to actually be able to study this material, assess it, and do some preliminary testing on various things in order to start to reproduce and replicate. One of the goals is we don't want to use the materials that Stan had, or Stan Meyer had, directly. In other words, because we don't want to blow something up or destroy it, or because it's 12 to 20 years old in some cases. And so we don't want to do that. So our goal is to be able to replicate what we see there and then determine its function. So this is going to take some research and some money and some really skilled people to work on that. And we presently have a number of engineers who contacted us, say they're interested in working with us. And so we will be putting together a team over the next a few months to assess all of those materials. Apologize for my gravelly voice. I'm still getting over a little bit of a cold here. So that's where the Stan Meyer technology is at. A lot of people have been following what we're doing. We visited his materials and saw the materials last January, just about a year ago. And hopefully it's taken us a long time to put this together, but hopefully it will be together within a few weeks. So that's where that stands. We're supporting a couple of other technologies, some standalone technology, all electrical, I should say, and electronic, that produces excess energy from a simple battery, but that's still in progress. That has been preliminary devices have been tested. Some stuff burned out, and so we're rebuilding some of that materials, and so that's an ongoing project. And that's about what I can report at this stage.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Loder. And now I'm going to give just sort of a brief outline of what we're going to discuss. And one of the things that both Ted Loder and I joined CSETI close to the same time. I went to my first training in the fall of 1996, and Ted Loder went to his first training, I believe it was in the spring of 97.
Yeah, summer of 97, yes, out at Crestone, Colorado.
Crestone, yes. And both of us have scientific backgrounds. As you know, he's a PhD scientist, and he was a professor at the University of New Hampshire in oceanography and earth sciences, right, Ted?
Yes, and chemical oceanography, yes.
Okay, and I've worked as a biologist for 20-some years. So we both have really scientific backgrounds, but also it seems a lifelong interest in ETs and UFOs. We heard about Dr. Greer and went on our first CSETI trainings, and everybody on their first training is at a little bit of a different stage. Some people are already very intuitive and have been long-time meditators. I had not been. I had an interest in meditation and had taken like a Saturday morning course on how to do it, and I didn't feel like I really knew how to do it and didn't know the importance of consciousness. And obviously that's one of the things that attracted me, and I think probably everyone, to CSETI, is when they hear Dr. Greer explain how we can contact the ETs in consciousness. And that's really a key integral part into the CSETI experience. And so at our first trainings and at all the trainings, some of the ways the ETs express themselves are extremely obvious. Bright lights, fully materialized things that if anyone is looking in that direction, they will see it. And that is a little bit of a trick because a lot of times people aren't looking in the right direction, and these things also happen very quickly. Recently, we had one of our members that is our group videographer now, and he made a DVD of some slowed down light interactions that we had going on in the field in Mount Shasta. And these lights were flashing very close to us. They were flashing in front of some trees that were maybe only 30 feet behind part of our group, and I happened to be facing those trees. But the lights, they happen very quickly and in a slowed down sequence. It was just incredible to see the forms they took and you know how actually very distinct they were, and it was incredible to see that. But so as I've said, some things are fully materialized. Anyone can see them. Other ways that the ETs express themselves very commonly, and in fact more and more commonly over the years, because our military detection systems can detect them when they come in a fully materialized state. So they come in a really subtle kind of astral ghostly state. And this takes some practice to see, and I know both Ted and I at the training we went to in Crestone in 1997, we're fortunate enough to have an amazing electrical storm happen, which cleared the air incredibly, and we were able to see all the subtle, sparkling, sort of like really subtle fireflies, the sparkling ET energy, and literally beings. And sometimes the ET beings are visible enough that you literally see ghostly shapes. Sometimes they're foggy, literal ghost shapes, like Casper the Friendly Ghost, pretty much. And sometimes that shape will be even more subtle, not so much ghostly, but sort of like a field of sparkles. And I don't know, Ted, do you have anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, you're doing just fine here, and I was going to add to that I've been in the field many times, probably not as many as you, Linda, but maybe 30 times over the last 12 or so years, 10 to 12 years with Dr. Greer. And there have been times when I've been out in the field and we've had a contact event going on the ground, and there are ETs around us, and I'll see the little gray shapes or gray forms, very, very subtle, by the way, not in your face, sometimes much more so. And sometimes I've seen them well enough to say to somebody, hey, you know, right there, right in front of you, or right there in front of you. And now it's interesting, a little story to tell that happened a number of years ago. I was standing beside somebody when the contact was going on, and whereas the only thing I could see by sort of using what we term soft eyes and sort of clearing your mind and using very soft eyes, sort of defocused a little bit. You often see these better than if you're just trying to pierce or look very, very hard at something. And I remember at that particular time I could see, using the soft eyes, some shapes, but that's all I could see. And the person who was beside me was whispering, do you see them? They're right in front of you. Oh, my God. Do you see them right in front of you? And, you know, I'm sort of trying to keep my eyes soft and not strain too hard, and I could just see the vague gray fuzzy shapes. And after we had sort of left that area where we had been for this contact, I asked her what she saw, and she literally described in detail the ETs, their size, what they were wearing, what they looked like, etc. And all I saw was the sort of the gray shapes. And which, you know, one says, well, maybe she was just dreaming or thinking these things. And independently, I had talked to Dr. Greer and asked him what he had seen, and he described a tall being and a short being, and he had described what they were wearing to me personally, out of sight, hearing of anybody else. And it turns out that he described exactly what this other woman had seen. And so I went back to her and said, you know, you nailed it. You saw what most people did not see. And so finally confirmed it. But that's part of the subtleties of what Linda is talking about here, whereas sometimes we just see, very often we'll see within these gray shapes, they'll be sort of sparkly. And you might describe that a bit, Linda, while I clear my throat.
Okay, well, he's exactly right. Some people have the seemingly innate capability of literally visualizing these beings very distinctly, and I think that most people aren't quite up to that level of skill yet. I know I'm not. I still see them as ghostly shapes or sparkles, and but one of the things that I think, you know, with practice, hopefully, you know, we'll be able to see things more distinctly. With practice, you can learn and train your eyes to be able to see these really subtle things, though, and that's really what amazes me, because in the old days before CSETI, I didn't even know that capability existed, and it's simply knowing that it exists enables you to see it, because then you look for it. You train your eyes. Anyone can do this. It's a matter of practice, and I think it's also aided by meditation and consciousness, because when you go into expanded consciousness, these things, you're just open to more things, I think, all around you. But sometimes the beings literally are more visible than other times, and there's been times, I know, particularly at a site we go to in Joshua Tree National Park, we walk down a path which we were led to in 1996 when we saw an enormous ET craft the size of your fist at arm's length come straight down. It was teal, sort of a fluorescent teal color, and it was just incredible. It went directly into the ground and illuminated the whole desert floor, and shifted out of visible phase and went under the ground at this site. So we know there's an underground ET base there, and we go out there every year that we go to Joshua Tree. And I know walking on down that path one particular night, I was with Dr. Greer and a few other people, and it was after most of the group had already left, and we just wanted to take one final walk down the path. And the ET beings along the path were incredibly bright. They were just glowing white, and again, I saw them as ghostly shapes. Dr. Greer probably saw them much more distinctly, and I'm not sure what the other people saw, but we all saw them very, very distinctly. And then we were buzzed by this enormous jet out of Edwards Air Force Base that came. It was a really large plane, and it flew over us really low, and it had its landing light directed at the ground, so it was illuminating the ground. And so we all crouched down behind bushes. And the ETs literally, like using a dimmer switch, they totally dimmed down and became virtually invisible while this plane flew over us. And then after the plane kind of circled over us and passed, the ETs brightened up again, and you could see this literally with your eyes, like I said, using a dimmer switch. They dimmed down, then they brightened up again. And we've seen that happen with astral craft that we've seen in the field as well, where it'll look like sort of a foggy cloud in the shape of a saucer-shaped craft.
Almost like a little fog bank.
Yeah.
In an area where there's no fog.
Right. This is typically in a desert where there's absolutely, dry, probably single-digit humidity and no clouds. And oftentimes the ETs they'll illuminate these things a little more obviously, kind of to get your attention, and then once you comment on it and they know that your attention is focused, they'll dim it down, sort of to remain in a more subtle state, because our military detection systems actually can detect these ETs and their craft when they're in an astral state. And I think probably the more visible the astral state, the more easily detected they are, and that's why they dim down when these planes fly over. But it's just incredible and delightful how the ETs actually they're participating in the training on CSETI excursions that we go on, and they literally, catch our attention, and then they'll change, and then they'll become more subtle, and they'll train us to see them in a more subtle state.
Right. One of the absolutely, and I actually missed that little trip down that path that night. I was probably packing up my telescope and my gear, so it was fun hearing about that again. I wanted to make a comment about something you mentioned earlier, and that is the little subtle flashes of lights that occur around us, sometimes right around us, sometimes right above us. Dr. Greer, for years, as well as several others, had said, "Oh, did you see that flash? Did you see that flash?" And the majority of the people in the group are saying, "No, where was that?" And it was almost like you kind of didn't believe what people are saying because I didn't see it, or some other people didn't see it. And then in the last few years, I know I've sort of opened my mind up a bit more to this sort of thing, and I began seeing some of these. Certainly not the number that Dr. Greer and some others see, but I know I've seen these flashes. And when this fellow who was starting to videotape with a very high-end night scope on a high-quality video camera started picking these things up they were happening around us just like some people were seeing with their own eyes, but they're very, very fast, and frankly they would happen in a few frames on a video. So you might have a fraction of a second, a tenth of a 3 or 4 frames on a video frame at 24 frames a second or whatever it is. It's still just a fraction of a second. If you aren't looking with your eyes open, not flickering in that direction, and you're sort of your mind ready for it, you totally miss it. And the fun thing is that the camera picked those up, and it's just like people were saying did you see that or did you see this? And sometimes the flashes occur right over somebody's head within the group, and now that's different than some of the flashes that we've had in which it's almost like a flash bulb going off and illuminating the whole group. And it's sort of like a whoosh of a flash bulb. Not an electronic flash, which is very fast, but more like a flash bulb, the old kind of flash bulbs with the metal inside the glass bulb that would burn and sort of create a flash that it would last for maybe half a second or something. And we've had flashes like that occur over the group that everybody sees, no question about that.
We're just so illuminated, like in a spotlight.
Right, and those have happened a number of times when we've been out, say, in the desert on a totally perfectly clear moonlit night, not a cloud anywhere in the sky, totally dry, clear, and suddenly this flash occurs over the group. That is quite amazing, actually.
And another thing I think that aids us in seeing some of these really subtle and quick light flashes is being in the meditative state, and that's a really integral part of the CSETI protocols. Is Dr. Greer leads us in guided meditations, and then we also do our own silent meditations. And we spend several hours out in the field at night, and we are always in a meditative state because of these meditations we've been doing. So we've expanded our consciousness, and one of the things that aids us in doing is in looking in the right place to see these really quick flashes and to see these objects, because it somehow your awareness when you're in an expanded consciousness state is just drawn to look in a certain direction, and that's when this split-second light, ET light, will occur or something like that.
So very true, and it's kind of sad and funny in a way, because so many people who've never done this before will often be out with this for the first time at a training for the first time, and things will be happening all around them and they don't see anything because their mind isn't opened, and they haven't opened their mind to the subtleties, and they aren't looking in the right direction, and yet other people are seeing all kinds of things. It's rather very interesting, but we often tell the story, or Dr. Greer often tells the story of a medical doctor trained to look at a slide of blood cells, for example, will see very subtleties in the blood cells that would indicate a disease or health or whatever else, whereas if you or I, or maybe not you, but you're a biologist, Linda, but if I as a chemical oceanographer or whatever looked at it, I just see red blobs. And so there's a matter of training your seeing ability and sort of expanding your awareness. And as you train this, you start to see probably into the infrared a little bit more and into the ultraviolet a little more. And it's like training your hearing to hear subtleties in music, for example, that the untrained ear would not hear any difference at all, whereas somebody well-trained could hear the subtleties of frequencies and notes and what have you. And the same holds true in the field, and that's one of the things that we try to teach people in the field by using meditative techniques and consciousness to expand your abilities and open your mind to these more subtle events.
And also, I think what meditation and expanded consciousness aids us in doing is being more intuitive and getting the feeling of the things that we see. For example, we're usually out in wilderness areas where Native Americans had existed and roamed, in many, many hundreds of years past. And it's just incredible how you can feel and detect the presence of Native American spirits. You can feel the difference and know that something is ET and something else is Native American. You can sense sometimes the presence of the nature divas, nature spirits, and also, and this is just an amazing effect, I think, of being in this expanded consciousness state, is we are often in the presence of celestials and angels and avatars, and you can totally feel when one of those is present as well. You get a sense of such a sacredness and spiritual, just an incredible spiritual presence. And that makes me think of, there's a few special areas at just about all of the locations that we go with CSETI trainings that we call the contact sites. And there's one in Crestone, Colorado, up on Mount Blanca, that both Ted Loder and I, in our 1997 training for the first time, were led to this by Dr. Greer and his assistant at that time, Sherry Adamak, who's since passed away. And it was a site, it was a clearing up a rocky path and sort of off into a forested area, and it was a small clearing that we walked up to in the middle of the night without any flashlights, and there were seemingly white rocks that virtually paved the path, the edges of the path, and showed us the way into this area where Dr. Greer walked through sort of an arch of very subtle golden light, and he literally started to disappear as he walked away. And we've since seen this happen many times, but it really blew me away for the first time to see this, because literally his edges became indistinct, and he looked like he might dematerialize. And he said that actually at the time he felt like he might dematerialize. But I also I saw ET beings of different sizes. Some were short, little light, kind of light Casper beings, and some were taller, and they accompanied him, and kind of some actually scampered kind of playfully after him as he walked.
You're about 3 feet tall or so.
Yeah, some were like 3 feet tall, and then there were some like maybe 12 or 15 feet tall. And I had just the overwhelming feeling of the utter sacredness of the experience. And that was the first time that I was exposed to avatars and celestials in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the following year when we went back, and Ted, you and I and a couple other people walked into that clearing in the daylight, because we wanted, we
yes, I remember
this memory of it being so incredibly mysterious and sacred. And in the daylight, it was just a little rocky clearing. It was, seemed pretty ordinary.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing. I went back to that same location several years later by myself one evening. I was all up there, all alone in the mountain, and it felt totally different. It was just a cold, rocky place on a mountain. No feeling at all. In other words, there's no ETs were home, and it was very different to feeling than when I'd been there with other people and the ETs were with us, when it felt warm and safe. And in fact, one time we were there, just a few of us, and the ETs were there, and it was like walking into a hot shower, just right on top of, right along the side of this mountain. And because they had sort of put a protective space there, and it was like walking into a hot shower. It was palpable. You could feel the air. This is
really
late at night one evening.
That's another of the subtle ways that the ETs express themselves and their craft as well, is literally, and I know that Ted, we've both had little small recording thermometers out in the field that have measured a distinct change in temperature between, say, our circle might be in a cool area, a typically ambient temperature of the general area, but there will be we'll be able to see a kind of shimmering area of a craft, and we walk into it, and it is palpably warmer.
Yeah, it's quite amazing, and it's interesting. You were explaining this and discussing some of the things we observed, and it's just about almost impossible for people to believe without having experience. But having experienced these things literally dozens, if not hundreds, of times over the years, and it's almost a natural event for us who have been to many trainings.
It really is, and there's many times when an ET craft will settle over us in our circle. We make a circle of people sitting in patio chairs in the field, and so oftentimes there's 40 to 50 people in the circle, so it's quite a large area. And I remember especially it was really obvious in 2007 in Joshua Tree, where we had thermometers, and we had a thermometer in our rental car, built in, a temperature gauge, and literally it was something like 64 degrees in the field, and we drove out at the end of the night to the road, which was only 3 miles away at the same elevation, and it was like 39 degrees. There was that big of a temperature difference because we were engulfed in an ET craft, which was keeping us warm, and literally it keeps us warm, and we're really thankful when the ETs do that on a cold night too, because it totally makes it more comfortable. But there's immediate temperature changes where you walk away. Say when the circle is engulfed in a craft, you walk away from the circle, say maybe 20 or 30 feet, and it is literally a lot colder.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had this happen so many times. And just to give an example, this is kind of funny because most of my experiences have been in a large CSETI group. Since I go on all the trainings, I do have a smaller working group that I go out with locally, but less frequently actually because I'm at so many of the CSETI events. And so this one particular year, another woman from our group named Jan and I went to visit a woman that had just been to a Mount Shasta training. This was a few years ago in Mount Shasta, and this woman lived in southern Oregon, just a few hours really north of where Mount Shasta is in Northern California. And she had ETs on her property that she owned. She lived in the woods in a rather desolate kind of area, not many people around, not even many homes around. And it happened to be an area where there were ETs. There were some limestone caves underground, and the ETs were apparently inside the caves. And she was having trouble and had trouble about a year prior to this with black ops trying to exterminate the ETs from her property. And she was afraid they were gone, that they had either been chased away or killed. The black ops people eventually left, and she hadn't seen any ET presence in nearly a year after this happened. So this other woman, experienced CSETI member Jan, and I went up and spent a weekend with her. And I know this one night we were lying out on her front lawn, and it was cold. We were bundled up, and the sky was just crystal clear. It was utterly black. There wasn't a human light anywhere in sight. So the sky was just incredible, and the stars were just beautiful. And the first night that we got there, we were lying out looking up at the stars, and we didn't get a sense of any ET presence that night. Well, the next day, we were out exploring during the daytime, and as evening approached, it got really cold. And so we really bundled up and went out that night. And it was another crystal clear, late kind of early fall, late summer day, and there wasn't any moisture in the air, and we laid out under the stars, and it was really strange. We were commenting. Well, for one thing, we were unbuttoning our jackets because it was warmer than it had been earlier that evening when the sun was still out, just going down, and it was strange how warm it was. There were like 4 of us just lying out looking, and we couldn't see the stars. It was like there was sort of a mist in the air, but yet it wasn't humid at all. But the stars were obscured, and we were just mystified by this. We were, commenting, this is really weird because last night the stars were so crystal clear, and tonight they seem to be obscured, and it's just bizarrely warm. So we got up to go inside, and suddenly, I mean, it just dramatically, again, like someone flipped a switch, it got cold, the sky got crystal clear, and Jan and I looked at each other and we were in a craft. And it was the first time that it had happened to us outside of a CSETI training. So here we were, just 4 little people in the wilderness, practically, by this woman's cabin in the woods, and the ETs were being very, very subtle since they had been attacked by the black operatives, and so they were only appearing in very, very subtle ways, and they showed us that they were there by putting us in a craft, and we got it, so that was kind of enlightening for us, that we did this on our own without Dr. Greer and the group there, and it was such a striking experience. And actually ever since then, this woman has had many experiences with ET craft coming when she goes through the CSETI protocols and meditates and goes into expanded consciousness, and the ETs are still there, but that showed us that the ETs were still there. They had just gone into a really subtle mode so that they wouldn't attract any more attention.
That's a great story, and then a couple. I liked your term. We were mystified, Linda. It's a good pun, and you slipped it out without even realizing it.
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time.
But that's a real important, in a sense, lesson for people to be aware of, that you don't if you're in the right state of consciousness and perhaps the right locale or locality, you don't need Dr. Greer with you, that you can do these protocols and sort of meditative protocols on your own or as a small group like you, and have some amazing experiences, which we've all had at some point or other.
Yeah, that's really true. And we have had in my working group, and in everyone else that does a working group, they also have amazing experiences. Another thing I'd like to point out is in the realm of meditation is it was in Crestone, Colorado in 2007. We always do a meditation in a Zen dome that they have there. It's this beautiful dome, and it's just it's a wonderful spiritual place. And we go into that dome, and Dr. Greer always does a guided meditation on the cosmology and the aspects of the cosmology. And then we had a really deep meditation inside this dome, and we left, it was probably about 5 p.m., and we go out to the field maybe around 8:30-ish, and so between, say, 5 or 6 and 8:30, before dinner we lie down and meditate, or we sit, in our respective rooms and meditate. So Dr. Greer was meditating, and he had this most amazing meditation that he told us about later, where he, by the way, is a world-class meditation teacher, and spent many years in the 70s with the Maharishi and worked with the Maharishi, and has over the years in CSETI trainings given us all a mantra, the mantra that he was given. It's a 3-syllable mantra, and we've used that. And this particular meditation that he had, the mantra became a sound, and it became tones, and so he really was. It was revealed to him in this meditation that the mantra was meant to be toned or sung, and that over the many centuries that had been lost from the mantra, and mantras had just been given as flat words, and that they can be much more powerful when they're sung in these tones within your head. And so he came out of that meditation, and later that evening was telling us all about it, and we recorded the 3 tones of his mantra, and we have a musician in our group that put it together, and it actually has become a 2-CD set, and it's called Cosmic Consciousness, A Course in Advanced Mantra Meditation. And in the first CD, Dr. Greer explains how the mantra tones were revealed to him and how to use the mantra. And then the second part of the CD is actually a recording of the particular guided meditation that he did in the Zen Dome that year, and then the mantra tone set to music that this man named Charlie Balog, our CSETI musician, put together. And what is so amazing, I think, about this particular meditation CD that we have, and by the way, it is available at the website cseti.org, CSETI.org. And what the mantra tones do is they kind of play in your head, like when a song, usually it's a lame, commercial ditty that you've heard on the radio or something gets stuck in your head and you can't get rid of it. Well, this is a good song that gets stuck in your head. It's simply 3 tones, and it plays in your head. And once you practice with it a while, it kind of stays in your head. And I know I'll find myself, walking at the post office and the tones going through my head, and I'm smiling. Mm-hmm. It's a stress reliever, and it just keeps you in a semi, I think slight meditative state pretty much all the time. It's amazing.
And it's totally legal.
Yeah, it's legal. And what we've said before is imagine if most of the people in the world had this mantra tone running through their head all the time. I mean, what a better world it would be. People would just be in a better state of consciousness to get along, not to fight, just to be happy, to be more free of stress. And so this is one way that this can help people in just in their general lives. And I know really with my experience in CSETI and using my intuition more in the field, because in order to see the subtle sights that we've seen and to feel and be able to discern the difference between the different types of spirits, whether it's, like I said, if it's Native American or if it's a subtle astral ET or whatever, I think it trains you to use your intuition better. And I have noticed over the years I'm much more intuitive also, which is really helpful in life as well.
Yes, so it has... What we have been finding is, and I know exactly what you mean, Linda, walking along sometime, I'll just be taking a quiet walk in the woods, sort of a peaceful walk, and suddenly the mantra is there. It just quietly plays along as I'm walking and then sort of fades out gently. It's just wonderful, actually.
It really is.
That CD that Dr. Greer and Charlie and others put together is really great because he goes into the kind of a short history of mantras, what they're about, how they're used, and so you aren't using this thing in a vacuum. You have a sense of where it's come from and how to use it or whatever. So that's really very, very good. And then the whole discussion of the cosmos, the cosmology, about the reality of nature and the reality of matter and what have you. Lecture is also very, very interesting. And it's also interesting because when he does that, I'll call it a lecture, in reality it's a guided meditation, and what he is doing, he's actually observing and seeing what he's describing. It's sort of in real time. And so you're actually sort of getting a first-hand witness to the reality of nature and matter in the cosmos, as opposed to something from a book or whatever. So that's a very interesting aspect of it.
Another really good point that with Dr. Greer's guided meditations. I remember the first time I discovered that he was describing what he's actually seeing in a meditation was, I think it was back in 1997-ish, and at Stonehenge in England. And we had a group in Stonehenge. We went in after hours. You can get special tickets to go in after hours when no one else is there. So it's only for your own group that you go in at night, at twilight, and then at night. And so we were sitting among the rocks in Stonehenge, of all places, and he was doing a guided meditation. And it was just incredible. Just the atmosphere of where we were and the feeling of the ancient beings that had been there before us.
Wow.
And he did this most beautiful meditation, and afterwards I asked him if he could meditate while this is a naive question, but I was a naive person learning about meditation, and I said, can you meditate when you're thinking up those most beautiful words that you say when you're guiding us in a meditation? And that's when he said he wasn't sitting there thinking up words to tell us, he was describing what he was seeing. And I think of that every time now that he does a guided meditation, because he does the most beautiful meditations, and he is seeing these things, and then you can tap into the words that he's saying as well, and you can go along with him on the trip, and you can see these things too, and it's really incredible. It's an incredible way to get into a meditation.
Mm-hmm. So, but to reiterate, that CD, and this isn't particularly pushing it, but it's available on the CSETI website, www.cseti.org, and you can order the CD. It's a two CD set in a nice, very pretty cover with a picture by Linda on it, and enjoy it.
Mountains in Crestone.
Right.
And as Ted said, we're not pushing it, but it's just such an incredible tool, and when you understand, and I'm sure many if not most people listening to the World Puja Network are familiar with meditation, and so many of you have been given mantras over the years, and when you know the background, you can really understand this huge breakthrough in how to use a mantra that Dr. Greer was given in this meditation when it was discovered that the mantra should be expressed as a tone, not just as something flat and spoken. And that leads me to another. It's going to be an up-and-coming short book and CD on the Orion transmissions.
Good. I was hoping we would get to that, Linda, because you think you've heard some wild and interesting sort of off-the-normal track things. This is even more interesting, and some might say bizarre, but I was there, and Linda's going to talk about the Orion transmissions. Go ahead, Linda.
I'll talk about it just briefly because
yes.
Those of you listening to this interview can go to the archived interviews of Dr. Greer's at the World Puja Network website, and this is the December 26th interview that I did with him on the Orion transmissions in great depth, where we actually even played a 3-minute clip of the transmissions. But we had our first. Well, I'll start sort of from the beginning. I always have, and for many years I've always had a cordless radar detector with me in the field. I place it under my chair in the field, and I'm always sitting next to Dr. Greer, and it occasionally will go off, and some burst of rather short burst of tones in one of its bands, and this is always in response to an ET craft, and very often we'll see a craft and the radar detector will go off, or occasionally we've seen one of the ghostly, what I see as a ghostly being, it'll walk in the direction of the radar detector, and when it gets near the radar detector it will go off. And many times it doesn't go off at all for a whole training. And so when it goes off a little, it's always exciting. When it's only gone off a little, up until 2007 in November, we had our first Orion transmissions where the radar detector went off for 23 solid minutes. And
let me point out something, Linda, before you continue, that the group is, when this happened, is sitting out in the middle of the desert in Joshua Tree National Monument, in the middle of the night. We're by a road, but there hasn't been a car on our road for hours, and the nearest road is miles away, and there's no cars over there either. So this is out in the middle of the desert with nobody else around. Go ahead.
Yeah, 30 miles in the middle of a national park where there's nothing that could possibly signal a radar detector to go off. And so it's actually this one particular night, it was the night of November 6th, and it's actually had turned into November 7th, 2007, because it was after midnight. It was actually about 10 minutes till 1 a.m., and we were getting ready to leave the field, and people were starting to pack up their things, and Dr. Greer has it's about a 2-inch diameter rose quartz ball, and he just kind of spontaneously held it to the sky above his head, and the radar detector started going off under my chair about 3 to 4 feet away from where we were standing. I was standing right next to him. We had approached the center of the circle. And so he asked everyone to stop moving and stop, they're packing up, and everyone just stood still. And he kind of held the radar detector and was basically he held the quartz ball. No one ever touched the radar detector, and we didn't even move closer to it. We were only 3 to 4 feet away from it. And he was moving this quartz ball around in the sky, and when he pointed it towards Orion, the radar detector just went nuts. It was just going off like crazy, and it was going off at different volumes, different bands, different speeds. It was just amazing. And
it was almost as though the radar detector was talking to us in its limited radar detector language.
It was. It was very much like, and what Dr. Greer explained later was that he was receiving transmissions from the ETs and the celestials in the sector of the universe in the sky where Orion is located, and they were coming through him, through his body as an antenna and kind of a step-down transformer, and it was conveying knowledge, but not really knowledge that you would necessarily be able to understand or translate at that moment. But these transmissions were affecting the radar detector, basically just providing an audible signal that all of us could participate in hearing. But these were subtle signals that were coming into all of us, and in fact everyone on Earth. So this happened in 2007. Well, we went out there again this past November, and it was November 5th was the first night that it happened, and it was an optional night. There were only 21 of our group members in the field that night, and typically our group had 42 members, so that was interesting. It was exactly half the group. Well, another woman had a radar detector in the field as well this past year. She had it was a different brand. It had like a different sound. I call it a different voice. It spoke in a different voice, the same bands as mine, but like in a different voice, which turned out to be amazing because you could tell the difference between the two radar detectors. And they were sitting, she was sitting a ways away from us, so her radar detector was probably 8 to 10 feet away from mine. And as soon as Dr. Greer and myself and our car group got to the field, he walked into the middle of the field, and her radar detector started to go off. And it went off in a couple of short bursts, maybe 30 seconds apart, and then more frequently, and it became obvious after just a few bursts of it that we were having another Orion transmission. And he stood near it, and for about 55 minutes, we all kind of stood around, and we didn't move. We didn't want to disturb the transmissions. And her radar detector was going off like crazy. Mine, sitting 10 or less feet away, went off one time during that period. And that's all. Well, then eventually we took our seats, and within a minute of Dr. Greer sitting in his chair, which was now only 2 to 3 feet away from the radar detector that had been under my chair, my radar detector started going off, and the other woman's continued to go off, and they both went off simultaneously. And this is impossible because when the police sweep you on a freeway with their radar gun, it's like a wide sweep. It's not like so directional that something 10 feet away won't react and something 10 feet away from that will. I mean, it's impossible. And so these radar detectors are going off simultaneously and separately, and sometimes simultaneously on different bands. And this went on for actually 2 hours. It was by that time it was like after 1 a.m, and we were just cold and tired, and we stopped the interaction. It would have continued for forever.
Yeah, it was quite amazing, and very, very intense. And what would happen is that the radar detectors would go, and I'll play radar detector here, go beepity, 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 beep, and sort of talk to each other, and then they would stop. And Dr. Greer would say, this is the information I'm getting, or this is what I'm being told, or that he was trying to interpret on the fly. And then he would stop talking, and he would talk again, and and this went on for 2 hours. It was amazing. And
there were periods, and this happened again 2 nights later with our entire group in the field. And in in the day in between these two nights happening, we had gone to this Shaman Cave that we visit every time we go to Joshua Tree National Park, and there's room for maybe 8 or 9 or 10 people to sit inside this cave that's under a huge rock. And so Dr. Greer takes groups in and does a guided meditation with each group of say 7 to 10 people. And so it's an initiation into being an ambassador to the universe, which is what CSETI is all about. And so we had done that in the intervening day, and then we went back to our field site on the 7th of November, this past November, and immediately, as soon as we got to the site, both the radar detectors started going off again, only this time they were literally 2 to 3 feet apart on the ground, and they were receiving separate signals. They were going off simultaneously on different bands, on the same band. Sometimes one would go off, sometimes the other would go off. The ETs were controlling the volume because at one point the radar detector, mine that was under my chair, was going off really quietly, and Dr. Greer said, "Can't you turn that volume up? It's so quiet." And I said, "It's on high," you know. And no sooner than he said that, the next time it went off really loudly. So the ETs were participating with us, and what was just amazing about this last set of Orion transmissions in 2008 was that Dr. Greer was able to translate the information that was coming down. He from deep consciousness, he was able to translate into words the information that was coming down from the Orion transmissions, and they were affecting all of us that were there, but they were also affecting all of us on Earth, but simultaneously every being in the entire universe was being affected. And we really, I even got the feeling that these transmissions were heralding the beginning of a new era. And it was very profound. And as I said, these will be made available. Actually, it's been amazing because I've been working. Another woman and I were working with the transcriptions of the translations that Dr. Greer did of these transmissions, and then our musician Charlie has been working with consolidating the tones from the radar detector and some of Dr. Greer's voice speaking the translations into what will fit on just one CD. And so
that's going to be very exciting when that's completed.
Oh, that's going to be amazing, and we're already experiencing effects of that. I know I've listened to the audio recordings a number of times, and so has Charlie in getting them onto a CD. And we are both experiencing, we've both commented to each other, in like enhanced meditations, deeper meditations, and more visions in our meditations. Charlie's had a couple of really amazing lucid dreams. And I think that by reading these words that Dr. Greer translated and by hearing these tones of even though it's radar detectors of all the, kind of silly things, the feeling of what the ETs and the celestials were putting down onto us and throughout the whole universe, that comes through. And I think this will be something else, sort of like the mantra meditation, something else that will aid us all into getting into deeper consciousness and more expanded cosmic consciousness.
Well, I think this has given people a really good sense of some of the things that we've experienced, the more subtle aspects of our work with the ETs and with CSETI. My sense is our hour is just about up. Linda, do you want to close? And it's been a pleasure speaking with you people, and I hope you've enjoyed it.
That's right, and thank you very much, Dr. Loder, and thank you everyone who's listening on the World Puja Network. And I want to just leave you with the websites again. One is the orionproject.org, and the other is CSETI.org. And the CD of the mantra meditation is called Cosmic Consciousness, a Course in Advanced Mantra Meditation. So thank you all for listening.
And thank you.